Now, this week is quite a special one as we have two financial experts here with us tonight. I am sure some, if not most of you, know who they are. If you do not, let me just get the formalities quickly out of the way. Han Liew, he is a certified financial planner and chartered financial analyst. He used to work as an investment banker a few years back before founding Ringgit Plus, an aggregator that helps Malaysians make better financial decisions. Now, he's the founder of Halogen Capital, the first licensed fund manager in Malaysia, specializing in digital assets and innovative investing. Moving on to our other speaker, Mr. Sani Hamid. He's an economist and certified financial planner. He has over 30 years of experience in the financial markets, which really just shows how old he currently is. And he is a frequent commentator in the media. He has previously worked for companies such as S&P Ratings as a director in the sovereign team, overseeing the ratings of countries such as Indonesia, India, Malaysia, and Singapore. So Mr. Sani will be slightly late. And as you guys have heard, both speakers are more than qualified to address the anonymous questions that you guys have asked us through the week on NGL. But fair reminder, the things that we are going to say tonight are only our opinions and should not be considered as financial advice. So, without further ado, let's get into the first topic, retirement. How much is actually enough for retirement? Now, this is a question that has been asked by quite a lot of you guys as well. Take a look at this example over here. Now 41 years old, single, with today's EPF at 400,000 ringgit, ASB 60,000 ringgit, fixed deposits at 12,000 ringgit. Am I sustainable for retirement while fully able to support and take care of both parents at the age of late 60s? Parents don't have pension. Yeah, this is a question that has been asked by quite a lot of people because they've been wondering, despite having such a huge sum of money, 400,000 ringgit is not a small sum, they're wondering whether it's sustainable or not. Okay, so let me just direct it to the financial experts. I do have a few resources over here, which is from EPF. The minimum basic savings target that one should have by the age of 55 is 240,000 ringgit. Yeah, so this means by the age of 55, you could have this amount in both your account 1 and account 2 combined. Now this translates into a monthly income of 1,000 ringgit for the next 20 years to fund your basic retirement needs and necessities. But yeah, Han, let's dive into this lah. 240,000 ringgit, 1,000 ringgit per month. Is it enough to retire? And how can one plan for retirement at a young age, or perhaps at like the example said just now, at 41?
There's so much to unpack there, guys. Thanks for the question, Shinji. I think, as a financial planner, this is probably the number one question I get asked. Having advised and done plans for a few hundred people as of now. First off, I think when we look at the number, first impression is that it feels very low. How can EPF recommend this, right? It's too low to survive, 240,000 to retire, or 1,000 ringgit a month. But you have to remember there's the word basic there that tells you everything, right? Which is to say, hey, look, like, if nothing else, if you have this, you can spend 1,000 ringgit a month for 20 years. That may be enough to get you, the most basic housing that you can think of, a room somewhere, plus, subsistence food, meaning you can probably, not grow hungry, right? But not much else. So I think if you just focus on the word basic, and then use that to kind of read this table that we have here, I think that's the best way to look at it. But really, to plan for retirement, right, you've got to think of not basic retirement needs, right? You've got to think of your own personal retirement needs, right? Retirement is not the same destination for everyone, right? Meaning that the number is going to be different depending on who you are. If you are someone who lives a very basic life, it could be very close to this, right? But if you are someone who doesn't, you say, hey, look, I want more than just a basic room in a very secluded rural location that's very cheap and very basic food. I want to live roughly how I'm living right now. That's kind of, it's going to be a bit higher than that, right? So it's really about first figuring out what kind of retirement you want, and then working backwards, from there, right? And you got to start somewhere. You got to start there first, and then the whole process is what we take through with our clients, right? It's a very long process. Several. I don't have the silver bullet for everyone, but first thing, figure out what you need to spend. It's probably going to be higher than 1,000 ringgit a month. Figure out what the number is, and then start from there.
Yeah, also another interesting thing about this basic savings table over here is that you guys can actually see what is the minimum amount that you should have in your EPF account right now in order to reach this basic savings target of 240,000 ringgit by 55. So let's say like my current age at 26, the basic savings is 21,000 ringgit. So meaning if you are currently at this age and you don't have this amount in your EPF account, then you may have a bit of issue reaching this 240,000 ringgit by the age of 55 lah. And another thing that I want to discuss with you, Han, is that EPF has another figure actually, which is 600,000 ringgit needed to comfortably retire. So just now the figure that we talked about, 240K, that's the bare minimum, right? 1,000 ringgit per month. But this 600,000 ringgit over here, it translates to a monthly income of 2,500 ringgit. Now, assuming that EPF pays 5% per year, you actually receive 30,000 ringgit in interest every year. So 30,000, you divide it by 12, that gives you a monthly income of 2.5K. Or even if you decide to do a lump sum withdrawal, you will still get 2.5K per month for the next 20 years. And tracing back on what you said, lah, if people have this amount, 600,000 ringgit, would it still be sufficient to retire, or are we looking at a figure of like 1 million, etc., etc.?
Yeah, as in, so this is last year, right? So this was a statement made by, I think, Hisham, who's the chief strategy officer of the EPF. I mean, he said it in response to most people having the same thoughts that we have here the last 2 minutes, which is, hey, how can EPF say 240,000 enough? So Hisham goes out into the media and says, oh, actually, right, what we said is, that's basic. If you want a comfortable retirement, and then I guess his definition of comfortable is a bit higher than basic, right? He says 600,000. Why? Because two reasons he gave. One was, you want a comfortable, not just basic retirement. But two, when people when people retire, it might not be today, right? It might be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years time. Inflation starts biting in. So he says a number which I guess he's comfortable with to say that, hello, if everybody has this, at least no one's going on the street, right? So I think that's kind of first thing to say. So that you've got to think about yourself, right? If you are closer to retirement today, you're 55, you're 59, you're 60, right? And you can probably see yourself figuring out a way to spend 2,500 to 3,000 ringgit a month, right? Saying, okay, if my house is paid off, I don't live very lavishly. 3,000 ringgit feels possible, right? Possible. I use possible in the broadest of terms. But if you're retiring in, say, 20 years' time, 20 years' time, you're only kind of a 40-year-old. Shinji, you're 26, is it? So young.
Yeah, 26.
You're 30 years away from retirement at least, right? So you probably need to start thinking of a much larger number than 600,000 to have the same living standard as somebody who's 55, 60 today with 600,000, right? So you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, so the figure definitely has to be much higher when I reach my retirement age. Yeah, Mr. Sani is here already. Mr. Sani, mic check with you. Are you here?
Yes, I am. Sorry, a bit late. Yeah.
Hey, no problem. Let's jump right into the topic lah. Okay, we were discussing about how much is enough for retirement. We touched quite briefly on both amounts, 240,000 being the minimum target and 600,000 recommended by EPF to comfortably retire lah. So let's elaborate more on this. What do you think about these figures, and how should one plan for retirement?
Wow. Okay. Jump straight into the deep end of the pool. I saw the numbers here. 600,000 works out to be what? 2,005 per
That's
month,
right.
is it?
Yeah, 2,500 per
Yeah.
month, living off interest lah, if assuming that EPF pays 5% per year.
Yeah. That sounds more or less correct, lah. I guess it's the thing in Malaysia, I guess, is that you don't have to stay in the city. You can retire, back in your kampong, Kuantan, for example, and I probably it will make your money stretch longer. So I think it's a bit more flexible. 2005, although looks a bit tight, but I think survivable maybe. I'm not sure about in 20, 30 years time, but currently I think in current situation you would be still able to survive lah. Of course, more is better, but the bare minimum probably is there. In Singapore, the so-called minimum sum set aside upon retirement that grows to about that's 200 over 1,000. That will give you roughly about 1,002 Sing dollars per month. But that's assuming that you already have a fully paid up home. And so, it's a little bit different in Singapore. And maybe if I just give me 1 minute to explain. The majority of Singaporeans live in HDB. They own their homes, and I think you can also do this in Malaysia. They own their homes, and a lot of time their homes are probably 3-4 bedroom homes because they have a family, children, and such. It's when they reach retirement that they tend to downgrade. And so we now see some granny homes or homes which are much smaller, one room, one hall, meant specifically for retirees. So you save up, pay up your home, fully paid by the time you're 50 odd. Okay, sell it off. You could also do a reverse mortgage, and you get another lump sum of maybe 200, 300,000. If you're lucky, 400,000, 500,000 from that to supplement your EPF or CPF here. So that adds together to kind of give you a comfortable retirement with a home. And I think that's how it works here. I think possible for it to work in Malaysia also, except that housing prices may be a little bit less predictable than in Singapore.
Yeah, I like the part where Han talked about just now. Ultimately, the figures recommended by EPF, 240,000 and 600,000 is really relative. Some people may need more, some people may need less. So I guess the first step to plan for your retirement is to set an amount that you deem is adequate to retire, considering the previous two figures that we gave you guys. All right, now let's move on to the next topic, which is the current state of the market. Now, this one is quite interesting. I think Mrs. Sani has a lot to talk about this. What is the current state of the global and local market? And can you share more about ETFs? What ETFs would you recommend? So, some resources over here. Inflation has been steadily moderating globally. We take a look at US inflation. From its peak of 9.1%, it has gone, I would say, quite low or relatively low, currently at 3 to 4%. Meanwhile, Malaysia, we are pretty much at the central bank's target goal already. The latest figure came in at 2%, far away from its previous peak of 4.7 to 4.8%. However, we still have the Federal Reserve over at the US. They're still looking to maybe continue to raise interest rates. You can see over here, Jerome Powell, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, says that, hey, higher interest rates may still be necessary. And Mr. Sani, just talk to me about the thought process over here. What is your general outlook in the global and local market for the rest of the year? Okay, for 2023 first.
Okay. When we talk about market, probably talk about stock market, more the stock market, right?
Yeah.
Let's take one step back and tie it to the economy. The economy globally isn't doing very well. If you look at Singapore, for example, the latest survey of economists by the MAS suggested a 1% growth rate. Again, lower than the 1.5%, which was a couple of months ago. So trajectory-wise, it's quite clear that people are shading down their growth figures. Even in Europe, Germany is showing PMI numbers which have collapsed, and China and so on. The only one that's doing a little bit better is the US. But when you decipher the US, basically you see that they are actually pump priming at 8.5% budget deficit. In the so-called global financial crisis, they had a 9.8% budget deficit. So everybody's scratching their head and say, why are you fiscally spending at 8.5% or 8.9% deficit when your economy is not in a recession. You're actually adding fuel to an economy which is still growing, relatively speaking, stable. But you're adding that, and that's really causing the economy to be a little bit supported, so to say. So once that budget deficit of 8.9 wanes, I think the tide comes out and the U.S. economy will start to roll back as the rest of the world, together with the rest of the world. We're really starting to see that happening. The job numbers in terms of revisions have been negative. Every single job headline over the past 6 months, when revised, has been revised lower. Just give you an example. I think 2 months ago in June, I think the job figure was about 200,000. Quite an okay number. But then it got revised in July, got revised in August, and now the number sits at about half of it, 104 or 100,000, which is a terrible number if it had it come out in the first place. But in the first place, it came out at 200, but revised lower. So everything tells you that U.S. economy is also showing signs of weakening, a bit slower due to certain factors. We can go into it in the question and Q&A later, but overall, I think it's going to slow. Jump over to the stock market, or at least the markets itself. I don't see how the U.S. markets can remain where they are if the economy is slowing and such. I don't think it's personally. I don't think it has been discounted fully yet. The rest of the world, the markets have already kind of moved sideways. They've not gone anywhere. No one's rallying extremely high except for the U.S. Europe may start to pull back a little bit. So all in all, I think it's going to be a tough second half of the year for economies and also a tough second half of the year for markets.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just direct this question to Han, because Han, you recently talked about Bank Negara Malaysia's monetary policy. Yeah. Okay. So Bank Negara Malaysia, they kept the overnight policy rate steady at 3.0%. And you said that if not for the Malaysian ringgit weakness, which was recently at 4.67% against the US dollar, you suspect that they might have considered a 25 basis point cut to the OPR to 2.75% instead. So run us through your thoughts over here. And what is your outlook on the Malaysian economy, since Mr. Sani has talked about the global economy just now?
Yeah, I think maybe I rushed this out, right? No, I didn't. I gave it some thought, this one. But I think there's two parts to this, right? And I laid out those two parts, which is most of us know now, Q2 GDP for Malaysia, our economic print was, the lowest for the last kind of 1.5, 2 years, right? So the steam, or rather the steam of this pandemic economic recovery is starting to run out. There's a bit of that was high base effect. They keep saying that, and I did point out in the previous tweet that high base effect means in 2022 we had the massive EPF withdrawal in April, May, June 2022, which we did not have this year. So that's kind of like 30-40 billion ringgit of spending in various areas that we don't have. But nobody can deny that the economic recovery for Malaysia has started to sputter a bit now, right? So that's one. And second, I guess, the point which I'm making down there is that, inflation in Malaysia, as far as the CPI figures are concerned, we're back down to kind of what I like to call, what Bank Negara would probably call as acceptable levels. They say that in their words as well. And I didn't tweet this, but it's something for everyone to note. The BNM MPC might agree with me. If you are the type of hawk, and I remember Sani used to be a hawk that does this, right? To look at what the central bank actually says rather than what they do, the words they use, because it's very, very tactical and strategic. Over the last kind of 3 or 4 meetings, they've had words like, actually no, more than that, the last 2 years, they've had words like very accommodative monetary policy. And they actually removed that statement. Right. So in their minds, they're no longer communicating that the current OPR is accommodative. So that, for me, that's kind of like a signal that we're unlikely to go anywhere from now, meaning it's not going to go up anymore, right? Rate hikes are 100% over, based on what Bank Negara is saying themselves. And they're actually giving themselves a bit of room to even consider cutting. So that's kind of, where I'm going with this, which is as far as CPI is concerned, Bank Negara are saying, look, looks like inflation is more or less controlled now. They're having an eye on obviously the new oil numbers coming out, but inflation is largely controlled, and it's very clear to everyone that the GDP is starting to sputter. So can they help with a bit of monetary policy? I think they can. Whether they are going to is a separate issue, but at least as far as they're concerned, they've left themselves the room to do so by removing the statement around being slightly accommodative. So I don't know if that gives everyone a nice sense of what I was talking about.
Yeah. All right. So I think at the end of the day, it's probably a similar view to Mr. Sani as well. We're expecting growth to slow globally and also as well as locally.
I have a slightly different kind of view on OPR. I think Bank Negara will keep it for it's a much used word, higher for longer. The reason is we've gotten back to what we call pre-pandemic levels. I think pre-pandemic was maybe 3 to 5 around there, if I'm not wrong. So we're at a level where I think they're comfortable to keep it neutral, so to say, until and as when the economy starts to slow and show signs of a downtrend. We have to remember that one of the reasons why Bank Negara and many central banks in the world have aggressively tried to normalize rates, bringing rates back to pre-pandemic levels, is because when the next recession hits, they have to have room to move down. And I think they're going to be very, very careful when to use that flexibility. So at 3, you can move all the way down to 0. If you don't bring it up enough, you get stuck at 2, you're going to have only 200 basis points to the downside before you hit that so-called boundary of 0. If you start cutting too early, you're going to use up your ammunition ahead of when it's necessary. Because if we are really headed for a sharp recession or a sharp downturn, they need that buffer in order for monetary policy to work. Because once you hit that lower boundary, monetary policy is ineffective already. So I think they will try and keep it higher for longer and only use it when absolutely necessary to cut rates.
Okay, that's an interesting take, which I also saw quite a few research houses agree with your viewpoint. They're looking at Bank Negara Malaysia to keep the OPR steady at 3% for the rest of the year. Now, let's move on to recommended ETFs. We recently talked quite a bit about exchange traded funds. For those of you guys who do not know what ETFs are, it's basically pooling money from investors and placing the money into a basket of goods or an index that tracks a particular index, so to say. Okay, so what I read online, countless articles, is that they say, hey, don't go hand picking stocks. Instead, just invest in the US market, specifically funds that track the US market, like the S&P 500 index and the NASDAQ. Okay, so these funds include the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, VOO, and Investco's QQQ. So, Mr. Sani, I'll let you take this question over here. What do you think about US index market ETFs? Do you like them? And what generally are your preferred ETFs, if you have any?
Well, I have to toe the line properly. I can't give financial advice, and especially since these are traded instruments. But in general, like I mentioned, if you ask me with respect to the U.S. stock market in general, there are signs that the not only the market but the economy is probably now slowly starting to roll over. So I would be very careful. In a sense, even if people are putting together the S&P 500 together with central bank liquidity charts, and it's going, both of them are going opposite direction. They should be going hand in hand, high correlation. Liquidity goes up, you see the market going up. But in recent months, central bank liquidity has been reducing, not only in terms of quantitative tightening, but in a few other manners and so on. And yet the market continues to go up. So there is a sense that the market now has taken a life of its own, which is i.e. speculation, and there could be an adjustment because of that. So net, I would say I would be very cautious when it comes to the second half of the year, and especially markets like the US, which seem to be a little bit frothy. What I can give is basically a sense of themes which I think will drive certain ETFs. So we have told our clients basically that, and this is not now, but past 12, 18 months, themes like technology, especially those with regards to blockchain, digitization of the economy, themes like climate change, anything that's got to do with that. EV, of course, falls into that and so on. And commodities itself, because when you restructure and try and decarbonize your economy and such, you need a lot of, the irony of it is you need a lot of resources and commodities at the very start of it. So these are three themes which you can easily play via ETFs. You can go as minute as targeting single commodities, like there's a uranium ETF, for example, if you think that nuclear is going to come back and so on and so forth. Yeah, so it's very interesting, but that's more or less what I can say, like in a very broad sense.
All right. Let me pass the question to Han. Han, you previously worked as an investment banker. I'm sure you've dealt with quite a lot of ETFs before. What do you think about US index funds, specifically these three funds, and if you have any funds that you like?
Okay, have to be a bit careful too, right? I think, first thing about ETFs is that they've been around a while, but very interestingly, ETFs have been around almost, for probably the entirety of US stocks exceptionalism, right? Like we've gone through an incredible phase. You have it here, right? Almost 40 years. Certainly over the last 20 years or so, right? Where the US stock markets have just overtaken everyone, right? And we see that in our day-to-day lives as well, right? With the products we use, technology stuff that we use. We wake up, we Google something, we Google Maps to work, we use our iPhones, we use our Android, and the last 20 years has been quite best to describe as an exceptional period for US stocks. Now, I'm not saying it's time for it to end, but we just have to be cognizant that it has coincided with the rise of ETFs too. When I started working 17 years ago, ETFs were a thing that most people heard of, but not as well known as today, right? So we just keep that in mind that if you are choosing an ETF, right? What I was going to say is they typically should be very broad based, right? Don't try not to go for very sector specific. I know technology is a nice big sector, but try not to stock pick within ETFs, right? Or industry pick within ETFs. If you're going for ETFs, the whole point of ETFs is a nice tracked basket, very representative of a very broad market, low fees, right? If you're starting to pick, then you start negating all the benefits of ETFs, in my opinion. So like I said, the large S&P ETFs should not actually differ from each other. So you shouldn't have a favorite. So SPY, VOO, these things should be quite tracked with each other, in my opinion, right? There are frequently many variations of the same thing. So just look out for cost, I would say. But yeah, I think if one more, if you're a bit like a scaredy cat like me, I generally try not to follow trends too much. I have exposure, yes, but I also I believe that nothing goes up forever or nothing outperforms forever. So S&P is good. Worth thinking about having some emerging markets in there too, right? To balance that thing out. It's not just I believe in US and US listed companies all the way. It's I believe in the industry of humankind. Therefore, in companies, and you want to go beyond just US companies, lah.
Yeah, so ETFs itself, although it's cover a broad range of the market because it tracks the market itself, make sure to perhaps diverse into other countries or other markets as well. Ultimately, I think these financial advisors cannot tell you which specific fund to buy. You would have to do your own research and make sure you check up on the fees as well. Okay, because those fees at the end of the day they can add up to quite a heavy sum. Okay. So our next topic, now this one is also quite interesting, how to save more. Yeah, a lot of people are struggling to save these days considering that inflation, despite it declining, it still feels quite high. Take this example over here, who is currently 28, this guy, but still earning below 2,000 ringgit per month. Ooh. So yeah, if your salary is below 2K per month, that's a bit worrying because it's well below Malaysia's median salary of 2,600 ringgit. Yeah, so I'm depressed on how low my pay is and struggle to save. Any suggestions? Yeah, I think Han, previously we talked about this quite extensively, right, as to how a poor person can climb out of the poverty sinkhole. Do you mind just, talking about it in detail as to how what actions that these people could take?
Sh- sure. As in, it can seem very demotivating. Like I hear some of these stories here on your NGA. Right. I mean, the first thing I'll say is don't feel down. Right. The best of us started somewhere. When I started working, it was 2000 as well. Right. So it's not as in even the best of us, so called, right, have to start somewhere. Don't feel depressed. The first thing is to get your mind in a positive state, right? Because that's when you can build. You can build off a positive mind. So that's the first thing I'll say. Give some encouragement. The very fact that you're asking this question already means you're on the right track, right? The fact that you're reaching out, saying, "Hey, look, I need to solve something financially in my life, or I need to gain financial independence," is already a good move, right? So if you ask me, one of the most important things to do is to get yourself in that mind frame of, hey, I need to search out solutions out of my current predicament, right? It's not magic, it's really just income minus expenses is your savings, and that savings invested over long term gives you financial independence. That is the secret sauce of personal finance or financial independence, right? So let's look at the first two parts of that, right? First is income. You say, hey, look, my pay is too low. I have too many I need to increase my salary, right? How do I do that? Yeah, I mean, one of the things is to invest in yourself, all the good stuff. Learn as much as you can in your free time. Gain more skills. Those skills have value to your employer, right? And if your employer doesn't value those skills, find an employer which values those skills, right? So that's kind of, there is a market for skills. If you get skills, you get paid higher. Let's just say that first. And then on the expenses side, one of the things I like to say is, look, like you might be earning say 2,000 ringgit, maybe just below, but there will be somebody or a large number of people in Malaysia earning less than you, and they get by. So the question is, and I'm saying this, I'm saying this in the most kind of objective way as possible, right? If you earn 2,000, can you live like somebody earning 1,600, right? And you go, hey, it's so difficult, but yeah, somebody is doing that right now, right? Can you put yourself in that person's shoes, right? And that's an extra 400 ringgit in your pocket every month, which goes a long way towards your long-term comfort, your long-term kind of financial independence, your long-term financial freedom. So that's the first thing to do. I know it's tough, but imagine somebody living a bit lower than you. Can you live like that for a time to build out a cash buffer if you're not able to increase your income? And there are a couple of other tricks. The one that I discussed with you, Shinji, previously is something called pay yourself first. So, we all have bills, we all have commitments, right? Why not treat your future self like a commitment, right? Say, hey, look, it doesn't matter. Even if it's 100 ringgit, 200 ringgit a month, treat yourself like an electricity bill, a phone bill, like a petrol bill, whatever whatever that makes you stressed out. Make your future self stress you out a bit, right? And make yourself a bill. And commit to paying that bill every month, which is your future self. And you'll be surprised how fast you can get your emergency funds, your house deposit, your car deposit, etc.
Yeah, a good point you mentioned over there. A lot of people, when it comes to saving, right, they always save at the end of the month, right? And at the end of the day, nothing is left. They end up spending the entirety of their salary and probably just have a few ringgit left, right? But like what you said just now, if you opt to pay yourself first at the start of the month when you receive your salary, you immediately deposit that 100 or 200 ringgit, no matter how small the amount. That can actually go a long way to your financial freedom and climbing out of this poverty sinkhole. So, Mr. Sani, Han talked about how to, income minus expenses, how to, increase your income, reduce your expenses, etc., and live below your means. Now let's talk a bit about budgeting, right? Because the question over here also asks, how should I allocate my salary for 6-month emergency fund, a car deposit, a house deposit, and normal saving, etc.? So is there any like budgeting technique that you prefer? Say it's like the 50-30-20 rule, or are you doing something else?
I guess everybody is different. I guess you have to reach that comfort level as to again it's the challenge with this kind of anonymous message is it gives you kind of a very one-dimensional kind of view of the person, and there are many dimensions to this whole thing. In terms of even to the extent of what you're working as, do you get bonuses? How's your family makeup? Is it just you? Do you have kids? And so on and so forth. So I think Hans and I, when we answer, we're just answering with our hands tied behind our back a little bit and making a lot of assumptions. So I just wanted to put that up front first. So in terms of all of this, setting aside how much will also depend on how much you can save actually, because once you set aside, you're actually saving and putting all of this aside, and really it depends on your overall income minus expenditure. Of course, you spend less, then you will have more to save, and therefore each and every bucket you can do so. The only thing I can add here is the most in terms of priority, it's always best to save for your emergency first, and then prioritize what's the other thing that needs to be saved up. Is a car more important than the house? The only problem is if you try and save 5% here, 5% there, 5% here, you're saving maybe 50 ringgit, maybe at most 100 ringgit. It's not going to get you anywhere, in my view. If you're looking to save a couple of thousand to put down a deposit for a house, for a car. So you may want to just say, I'm saving for my first priority, which is maybe the house first. Or rather, the emergency is, of course, the first one, then the house second, then the car third. I think you will reach those minimum deposit needed faster rather than breaking them up. That would be my view itself when it comes to this.
Yeah, in the case of emergency fund, right? I can't stress the importance of it, having not you don't need to have 6 months, but at least have some money stashed away somewhere, maybe 1,000 ringgit, yeah. Just in case something bad happens, you do not have to, liquidate your investments or your future money in order to pay off this sudden unfortunate event, lah. So make sure you guys have at least, a bit some of money stashed somewhere safely that you can use and that is liquid. Okay. So the next question, this one is also quite interesting. Long commute times to office, good or bad? Yeah, this one has been brought up by Suraya also. And I tagged along from Suraya and decided to post it here as well because I have a question about this. I'm driving to the office for around 45 minutes, need to leave early, 1.5 hours back. So every day it's easily 2 hours of travel time. Yeah, has a lot of travel time. But my wife travels via public transport, which is just 100 meters away from my house. My rent is cheap, i.e., it's 300 to 500 ringgit below the market, and the environment is healthy, complete amenities, and no foreigners. Should I change my job or should I move out? This is another tough question, but I will pass it over to you, Han. Um, is long commute times to office a good thing, or should they actually move closer to the work environment, or perhaps change job, accept the lower pay?
I think it's completely personal, personally. I mean, I live 5 minutes from my workplace, right? And I do that by design. Because as in, I don't want to spend too much time on the road. I don't want to burn too much petrol. I don't want to burn too much on my car's depreciation, etc., etc. And for me, time is really important, right? The if it's half an hour, 45 minutes, that's time I could be spending with my family, or learning a new skill, right? Like I said earlier, right? Which is money, right? Time is money, in that sense. But then cost comes into play, so it really depends. So, for example, if you live far from your office because of cost reasons, then obviously for me to say move closer to your office and pay more, that doesn't make sense, right? Because you might end up paying more than what you save in all those things I said about you saving petrol, time, and car depreciation. But if you're in a situation where, hey, look, actually, you can actually move closer to where you work and not pay that much more, right? Then for me, it's a win-win, right? You go closer, you save time, you save money, and for me, that's kind of the holy grail, right? You save time, you save money, and even in your housing, you save because maybe your workplace is not like in KLCC or whatever. But actually, for this poster, I think happy wife, happy life. Better talk to your wife first, not us. If your wife is happy about it, better don't move, and then you'll get an unhappy wife later. Or at least talk to your wife and move to somewhere that she's happy with too. But for the second poster, I think that is the opposite of what I said, right? Which is move out further for more expensive. For me, that's the opposite of a holy grail. I don't know what you call that, lah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, an interesting part where Suraya pointed out over here is that she recommends as much as possible to stay near where you work because there is a study that she published, which I did not attach over here. Um, an additional 20 minutes of commuting per day has the same negative effect as receiving a 19% pay cut. So I'll just keep it over there, Han. What do you think about this? And let's say if this person has no wife right now, no commitments. Yeah, and what they do?
I think it depends, lah. I think that might be true in general, but for the individual, you might enjoy the commute, right? You might enjoy sitting in your car listening to a podcast. You might enjoy sitting in public transport for half an hour reading a book, or like I said, listening to a podcast, watching a video, whatever it may be. But the key is if you're finding yourself a drag, right, and it's a drag on time and money, then I agree with Suraya here. Better move in closer. But keep in mind why you're staying far away in the first place. If it's cost reasons, totally understandable. Save up until you can afford it. But if it's not cost reasons, I think you should certainly consider. So, for example, if you work in, as in I'm just spitballing here, lah, right? If you work in Shah Alam and you stay in Rawang, right? There's no need to do that because there's decent places close enough to Shah Alam to stay. You're far away from urban center, specifically our capital centers or our economic center in like KLCC or Bukit Bintang or Mid Valley. Those kind of very expensive places to stay around. Right, they're both kind of suburban. You can move from one suburban area closer to another suburban area.
All right. Mrs. Sani, what are your thoughts on this? Is long commute times good or bad? Do you enjoy driving your rented car or your own car or not to work?
There was a point in time where people would want to stay as far as possible from where they work. But I think times have changed because of the jams and the price of petrol and stuff. So everybody wants to stay as close as possible to where they work. Not everybody, but the majority of them. But it's easier said than done, like what Hans mentioned. It's a question of whether you can afford it. What do you give up in terms of if you pay more rental, you pay more for the home that's next to work, and you're not able to enjoy other things. You give up your vacation, you give up your this, you give up your that. So it's never an easy question. It's always a balance of priorities. So at the end of the day, you may commute to work and it takes you an hour or so, but you then are able to use the additional cash that you save up to send your children for tuition, for their football classes that you love to see them go to, and you can have your vacation with your family because you've saved some money by staying further away. So there's always a give and take in these scenarios. And again, like I mentioned, it's not an easy question to answer. It's really a case-to-case basis for different families.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, if you are talking about saving costs, like what Hans said just now, then maybe staying far away from your work and at the same time building up your financial independence, so to say, is probably a good thing to do. But if there is no great increase in cost, then it's actually probably better to stay near where you work?
Maybe people should start to have discussions with their officers or their, say, their companies, in terms of, if here in Singapore, basically 2 days work from home is now getting quite common, because let's face it, if during the lockdowns you could actually function and your productivity was quite high working from home itself, the companies understand. The companies may again, I'm saying may, come to arrangements where you could work from home on certain days. Maybe, again, I'm speculating, maybe it could come to a point where they say, okay, fine, take a 19% pay cut and you can work from home the whole time. Who knows?
Ooh,
Yeah.
19% pay cut, work from home. This is
Yeah,
a
because
tough choice. Tough
no,
choice.
but that's what the study is saying here, right? The satisfaction as
Yep.
receiving a
Yep.
90% pay cut.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if traveling actually results in you thinking that, oh, this is such a waste of time, I'd rather have 19% less pay than traveling every day, then maybe that's the answer to it.
Yeah, that's a good point you mentioned now, okay? And put it back to the audience. You guys have to consider for yourselves, like what Mr. Sani said just now. Think about it as, say, if I have a 20% pay cut and I reduce my commuting time by 20 minutes, is it worth it or not? If it's worth it, then yeah, you can probably talk to your employer about it and see if you guys can come to an agreement. Okay, so now moving on to the next topic, pros and cons of corporate companies. Now this one is also another interesting one, can be slightly controversial. Hi futurists, I'm 29, currently working in a small accounting firm that pays me a decent salary but with great flexibility and work experience, non-toxic colleagues, etc. Wow. This accounting firm must be very nice because I've never heard of someone working as an accountant and have, good flexibility and good work experience. But anyway, recently was offered a job at one of the big four companies. Congratulations. Should I change my job or stay with the current small company? Oh, yeah, another tough question. Han, I'll pass it to you. What do you think about this?
I think it comes down personally to whether you want to stay a professional or you want to become some sort of entrepreneur or work in an SME yourself, right? So if you want to be a professional, then I think you should definitely take the offer. Go to the Big Four, get that experience. There's a reason why they are the Big Four. They work with the biggest clients, the most complex stuff. You learn all kinds of stuff. You learn about new processes which are used globally. And if you hate it after 1-2 years, you can always move back to a small firm. And guess what? You move back to a small firm from a Big Four, I can promise you your salary will be much higher. Not versus the Big Four, but much higher than you are getting currently, right? So that's the kind of if you hate it after 1-2 years, you can always just move back. Now with EY, PwC, Deloitte in your CV, which is always a great thing if you want to be a professional. If you're not so big hard up on becoming like the kind of audit partner of audit or whatever, right? You might you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to work for yourself, or you don't have that kind of dreams of grandeur, right? You go, I'm just happy in my job right now. Then yeah, I think it's worth staying. Why? Because small firm, you might get a little bit more freedom in terms of processes. You might you get to think more creatively by nature, right? You work with clients which are a little more creative. I want to use that word very liberally, in nature, right? So I guess that's kind of those will be my considerations, lah.
Yeah, the question boils down to whether you want to be a professional or become a bit more entrepreneurial. Okay. Mr. Sani, although you're far away from this age, 29, but let's say
I was 29 once.
you were 29 once lah. Okay, but let's say you are in this situation, what will you do?
It depends on what you aspire. Again, 29 here, the person didn't say it was male or female or whatever. I'm not trying to be sexist, but if you are someone, if I were 29, okay, I would feel that basically the idea is to gain as much experience as possible. If staying in the big company or small or big, I don't care. If staying in this one particular company gives me the ability to learn as much as I can, then I would actually choose that company, because when I reach 30 odd, that's when I want to start hitting for the big guns and going for the bigger company. So if this guy here is saying that, for example, small accounting firm pays me decent but great flexibility, work experience, if he's been there for 5-6 years, he's learned every single corner of the career and workflow, then that's why he should actually, to me, he should actually move to the Big Four. That's where he gets to be valued. That's where his valuation, personal valuation is appreciated. He'll be valued fully for what he knows. If it's for example, again, I'm trying to be sexist, but let's say if it's a lady who just, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have children, I'm just happy where I am. Then staying put is fine. So different people have different aspirations. So it's hard to say also whether it's different aspirations will take them on different paths. But it were me, I would say go if I had learned everything I have to in this couple of years in this firm itself.
Yeah,
I mean, sorry, just want to chime in. That's a good point. Yeah, a good point, because and I should point out that in my line of work, I speak to quite a lot of the Big Four. Be it audit, tax, or consulting, and what I can share with the poster is that actually the Big Four are starting to be a lot more flexible with work, and be a lot less toxic in their work environment. And I know Big Four, great salary, great flexibility, totally non-toxic, right? That's what I'm hearing, and this is driven by. I don't want to point the finger at Singapore again, but driven by significant attrition from the Big Four to Singapore, meaning the Big Four are losing a lot of their people to Singapore. The pay is better there, stress level is higher, but pay is better. But so they're struggling to retain, which makes them have to do these things like higher salary, more work-life balance, more flexibility. So I would say to the poster, actually worth considering anyway. You might find the Big Four not too bad, versus what you expected.
Yeah. Okay, great points from you guys. Thank you so much. So, the last and final topic of the night is, what do youngsters need to know? This one is for the next generation out there, and for those people who are currently probably below 23 or maybe below 20, okay? So turning 18 next year, what are the first steps I should do to first solidify my financial foundation? We have a 16-year-old guy also, wow, very young, following the futurists already. But I have no clue about investing and want to start right. Any tips? Yeah, so Han, word for the youngsters out there, the next generation, what do they, need to focus on?
Studies? No, sorry, that sounds very uncle. No, I think I'm very encouraged that your audience is so young. Look, like at 16, 18, like I was only starting to learn about finance stuff, right? Principles of finance stuff. So you guys are really on the right track, really, by asking the right questions. For me, the key is I'm assuming you're still in university, college, university, right? And you want to start reading, right? Start reading about personal finance. Start reading about investing. There are loads of good books out there. You don't need me to recommend them, right? Like start reading on value investing, on technical analysis, on personal finance, credit, i.e. like saving, credit, budgeting, investing, all the kind of stuff. All kinds of good books out there. Just Google, you'll find them on Amazon, Goodreads, whatever. And take it from there, right? And then second is to actually start exploring, right? There's no better teacher than not just reading, but if you got $100 to invest, put $100 somewhere, right? And you'll never have a better lesson than losing money on that $100, right? Or making money, as the case may be, but most likely losing. So I would say those two things. Number one, absorb as many of these books as possible. You'll be surprised whether you find that you actually are interested in it or not. On worst case scenario, you find you're not that interested, and you're like, okay, it's not that interesting. I'll just do the normal stuff. Best case scenario, you find it very interesting, get deeper into it, and then build your knowledge base. So that's one part. Learn. Second part is learn by doing. So learn by reading and learn by doing. Start investing. Like open a CS account. You can't at 16, so ask your parents or something. But at 18, you can already. So at 18, you can open CDS account, invest in unit trusts and in ETFs and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, basically, before you actually put money into the market, make sure you put money on yourself. Make sure you have at least a bit or decent amount of knowledge on those products, and then you start to dive into it. And Han, I think you constantly mention this also for those people who are young. You have the time to actually afford to explore higher risk, higher return options, right? Because you have less to lose compared to those people who are at 50 or 60 or close to retirement. Yeah. Um, so, Mr. Sani, same question for the youngsters, turning 16, turning 18, whatever the young age lah. Okay. Considering that you're in their shoes, what will you do?
Uh, if I were at this age, I know it sounds a little bit difficult, but if there was a way you could find a qualified financial advisor to sit down with you, it would have been something I would have done. It's just that it just didn't cross my mind. It wasn't something you typically do at the age of 18 or even 16 or stuff like that. Maybe especially 16, but let's say 18, 19. And the reason is basically they will help you chart out more or less financially the path that you're going to go through. Very simple stuff like anybody who's taken a CFP, Hans, would know you have that so-called life cycle where at what point in life you start earning more and you get children, then you start saving less and stuff. So understanding these concepts itself and then having someone put it into a framework to tell you that, look, at this point in life when you reach here, you ought to be saving as much as you can. Because why? Because you won't be able to save when you start to get married. You need to get enough insurance because why? At any point in time, anything happens to you, you have some backing here. And don't listen to people when they say, insurance is a waste of money and stuff. Because I've seen people who actually, thanks to insurance, they are where they are, and I've seen people who don't have it, go into accident, and they just wiped out all their savings and stuff. So this life experience also will help them. And so these kind of pointers and hinters at that kind of age kind of gives you a little bit of a pathway to understand what lies ahead and what you can do. Because the rest of us who didn't get these kind of hinters and pointers, which is the majority of us, basically learned the hard way and started to have financial advisors come into our life in our 30s and 40s, and by that time it's, if we had done things earlier, it would have been so much better. So I do seriously think there was a way that someone at a very young age can pick up these kind of skills. And I, for example, intend to teach my kids who are now, one is 19, another one is 16. They are almost at a point where I'm just going to sit them down and really grill them into this is how you are going to approach finances for the rest of your life. So these are things which I think is missing. It's not easy. No one's going to pay. You can't. You probably don't have enough money to pay for financial advice. But if you could read up and stuff like that, I think that would be good.
Yeah, and I think ultimately for any of the youngsters out there or any age perhaps, if there's any burning question that you need to ask but afraid to hire a financial planner, I'm sure both of these speakers are more than happy to accept your questions and they will give you the best answer that probably you can get, okay, without any cost hopefully. Okay, so do message these two speakers on Twitter. They are on Twitter, okay, if you have any burning questions regarding to finance. Next up is probably a bonus question because we don't have any questions from the audience. I think this is also another interesting one. 26-year-old here, newbie on investing. I understand that credit cards, if used correctly and pay it off monthly, it can boost your credit score. For example, buying a house, cars, banks will give you lower interest rates. But personally, I'm a frugal person. Is it worth it to apply for a credit card just to build your credit score? Han, you were the founder of Ringgit Plus, specializing in credit card deals. What do you think about this? Should younger people actually uh, go for credit cards just to build their credit score? No?
Put me on the spot, huh? Yeah, can. Okay. Honestly, like two reasons, lah. One, you also covered this, Shinji, right? Which is credit cards are like fire, right? If you're a smart guy, you can handle fire. It's very useful. Cook food, stay warm, right? But if you don't handle it properly, fire can burn you. Similarly, like if you know how to use it, a credit card can be very useful, right? And add value to your life, not destroy it, right? Things like cashback, things like points, things like discounts, things like 0% payment plans, like that kind of stuff that helps your cash flow. These are all good stuff that you can use a credit card for, which you should, right? If you're able to be disciplined, just like when I tell my son don't play with fire, right? The question is whether he will actually listen to me or not. But when he's older, he certainly knows, right? And he certainly can use fire for the right reason, not play with it. So similarly, I'll give the same advice, right? Which is, if you're able to use it, please do. It's very useful on its own without even considering the credit score side. But yes, in my over 10 years at Ringgit Plus, not anymore, but previously, one of the things that the secrets of the industry is that indeed your current credit facilities are a strong indicator of your credit worthiness, right? The fact that you actually already have a facility, a credit card is a good one. Having a couple looks good on your score if you pay it off in full every month. Even if you pay off the minimum every month, is good enough for them. But for me, I'll advise everyone to pay off in full. But they will look at your score. They will look at your credit number of credit cards you have, versus, as well as home loans and car loans and etc. To give you to score you, right? Score your credit worthiness. Whether they score it for pricing, i.e., you get lower rates, or they score it for approvability, means you actually get approved for a bank with a low rate. Both are useful. So for me, two reasons. And for me, if you're a frugal person, you would certainly use a credit card for the first reason, right? For sure, because you ultimately make money, right? But yeah, long term for sure, right? It's to answer the question outright. Yes, it is worth it to apply for just one, not just apply, approve and use it and pay it off in full, just for the score. Because if you get approved by a bank which gives you a cheap rate because your score is good, then you've made it back in full, right?
Yeah, another thing about credit cards, right? So to look for the best credit card deals, just go Ringgit Plus lah. I checked out the website already. I think it's one of the, you know, best aggregators for, things about personal finance, etc., etc. Plus now they are giving a free touch and go credit of worth 800 ringgit. Ah. So anyway, guys, go and check it out. I'm gonna pass this question over to Mr. Sani right now. Applying a credit card as a young person, is it worth it just for the credit score? What do you think, Mr. Sani?
If it's just for the credit score, I mean, you have no choice, right? I mean, just weirdly enough, you have to have a credit card to have a credit score. That's the weirdest thing I find basically. You try to be the frugal person and not get trapped into this credit trap, and yet to get a credit score, you have to have a credit card. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But anyway, if it's just for that, then lah, can't help it. You have to get it, yeah. But if you're going to if you're going to ask me whether I believe in credit cards, I'm one of the minority which don't really fancy credit cards. I think it's like what Hann says. If you need to know how to use it. A knife can cut both ways. You can actually use it in a good manner. It helps you, or you can actually do a lot of harm with the knife itself. And my issue with credit cards is I think the majority of people don't know how to use it. Okay, so it's one thing to say that drinking a glass of wine is fine. I don't get drunk and I'm fine, and it helps my heart and such. But for the vast majority, they start to binge on it. So you don't blame the wine. You just blame the people who just cannot control. But that's it. So do you serve or don't you serve the wine? It's a question of, in my view, personal view, totally personal view. The majority will have to be safeguarded from something like this lah, in my view lah. Yeah, so it's a little bit a radical view, but I think credit cards, I think there's more danger to it than benefits if you take it from a very wide 30,000 helicopter view of the whole community lah.
Yeah, there's also a dark side that we are probably not exploring, is that credit cards, they give you the illusion of affordability, right? Because you don't actually feel the pain of buying something upfront with cash. It's with credit. It's same like this buy now, pay later features, right? Like those features that allow you to buy a random product. Like today I want to buy this, I don't know, maybe this pen or this book by installment, right? Then you end up not actually feeling the weight of that particular cost of that product. So at the end of the day, you end up spending more.
It's these things whereby you think you're in control, and I do say, and I do agree that that a minority will always be in control, but the vast majority of people will maybe in control at the beginning, but sooner or later, I've got this emergency, maybe I have this flexibility and this easy thing to use, credit card, just swipe it and use it. And then once you get used to it, I've got a second emergency, or there's sometimes not emergency, or now minus, since I'm so used to it. That is really, to me, the downside of it. People will then get, sooner or later, a group of them will fall into the trap of not being able to service it. And the big question is, at the end of the day, from a communal basis, community basis, does the benefit outweigh the cost of it?
Yeah, ultimately it is a tool, so a tool can go both ways. Make sure you use it wisely, and it can actually benefit you quite a lot. Okay, so I think now we are down to our final question of the night. Yeah, since nobody is asking questions, so another bonus question. Now this one is quite interesting also. If I'm earning overseas and I've already paid tax overseas, can I still voluntarily contribute to EPF? Will I get taxed in Malaysia over this voluntary contribution? Han, do you know anything about this? Because from what I've read online, is that once your income is taxed overseas, Malaysia won't tax any foreign income in terms of individual.
Yeah, there's something called double taxation law. So as in you'll get, if you're paying more tax than Malaysian tax, you'll get the rebate, right? You won't pay double tax lah. But I guess sounds like the poster is a bit confused around tax versus EPF, right? EPF is essentially private pension, right? So don't worry, you won't get taxed in Malaysia by contributing to EPF. There's something in the EPF called self-contribution. So if you are a freelancer or a gig worker, or you're just sitting in Malaysia as a Malaysian, you can actually open an EPF account for yourself and start contributing yourself up to 100,000 ringgit a year. So you can put in, then treat it like your unit trust lah, of which EPF is in fact a form of a unit trust, right? It's if you put money, pool it, other investors make investments, right? Or EPF makes investments on your behalf. So yeah, to answer your question, number one, yes, you can contribute to EPF. You can open up what are they calling it? ISRA account, and in fact you get some matching from government. First 250 ringgit a year. But the limit is 100,000 a year. If like you're a very high income earner, you can actually save up to 100,000 a year. Not bad. I think that's in short. And then you won't be taxed on it. In fact, you might get a tax break, right? If you might get a matching from government, and I think it's about 300 a year you get matched.
Also, there's also like a tax relief on EPF, right? That can apply to voluntary contribution. But I think this won't apply to this poster in this scenario because the individual has already paid tax overseas. I guess the question is that, if I'm bringing foreign income back from overseas to Malaysia, will it get taxed or not, right? And I don't think so, right, Han? Because he already mentioned that he has paid tax overseas, right?
Yeah, I mean, if your income has not been taxed anywhere and you remit it back, I think since 2022 there has been foreign source income tax, right? But like for somebody who's already paying tax overseas, you just remit it back, right? What in theory, as in in practice, what happens is that they charge the tax on it, but then you can just say, hey, look, like I've already paid tax on this, right? And in most other countries, it's higher than Malaysians, right? In Malaysia's tax rates. So you have paid quite a lot more tax than you would have if you stayed here. So in most countries we have a double tax treaty. So you would not have to pay tax twice, essentially.
Okay. So, Mr. Sani, just before we end tonight's session, do you want to take a bite on this question? Voluntary contribute to EPF?
I think the big debate is whether you should voluntarily contribute and see the money get stuck there, or you are better to just take the money and invest yourself and grow it potentially at a much faster pace. My own view is you should do it voluntarily because first of all, it's not everything. There's a limit to it. I always find it very astonished. I'm very astonished every time I open up my CPF and I see the balance amount inside. I'm saying, wow, you may have got so much set aside for my retirement. And it's because when you do it automatically and voluntarily, you can't touch it. That's very important. A lot of times I've tried to save, and I don't know whether this is the same problem with everybody, that the money is there, but there's always something for it to be used. I mean, there's something that needs use for it to be used, and I tend to dip into it and just ends up, not reaching its objective and such. So forced savings to me is necessary. It doesn't have to be 100% of what you have, but if you can set aside more, I think it's beneficial. At the end of the day, the money gets saved, and you will reap the benefit of it when you retire.
I mean, let's just stay on this question a bit longer, okay? And I want to direct it to Han as well. Assuming that this guy is self-employed, they have no requirement to actually apply for an EPF account, if not mistaken, but they can if they want to. What do you think, Han? Should they apply for a self-contribution EPF account and start voluntarily contributing, or do you agree on the flip side of what Mrs. Sani said that, hey, use the money for investments by yourself?
I think it's a mix of both Sunny's question answer and mine, right? Which is if you are earning overseas, you've got investment plan over there already. Yeah, sure. The only reason why you might consider opening an EPF is that you plan to retire in Malaysia, and then you want to have somewhere in Malaysia to put some money, which is exposed to Malaysian assets in Malaysian ringgit, right? And you don't mind it being locked up for retirement because that's the exact reason why you're doing it. But if you're not, you're earning overseas, you're already saving up for a pension overseas, whether it's private or state pension, doesn't matter, right? It probably is not a very good idea for you to lock out your money, more of your money for the long term. If you're already doing that, right, then you might want to consider more flexible investment options, right, that don't require you to lock out your money till you're 50 or 55. But then you're going to have to do a bit of research, find out, okay, what's the appropriate investment strategy for me based on my objective. So goes back to your objective at the end of the day.
Yeah. And also, I guess this is another interesting question is that should youngsters, considering that they already have the mandatory EPF contribution, should they actually contribute voluntarily to EPF every month, a small amount? Let's say maybe, 30, 50 ringgit, just to have a bit more savings for their retirement. What do you think, Han?
Same considerations apply. If you're looking for somewhere to earn 5 to 6%, fairly low risk because it's a big pool, and you're willing to lock your money up to your 50 or 55, yeah, sure, that's kind of something to consider. If you're sitting in Malaysia, living in Malaysia and paying Malaysian tax, then there's obviously the tax benefit as well. But other than those two things, there are other ways to earn 5 to 6% a year over the long term, right? If you speak to a financial advisor or financial planner, they will give you a couple of portfolios which can do that, right? Without the restrictions of EPF.
Yeah. Mr. Sani, same question. Voluntarily contribute to EPF for youngsters, small sum, so say 30 to 50 ringgit a month. What do you think?
Yeah, same answer I gave earlier, which means that I believe that setting aside money in this kind of forced savings will surprise you, as it has surprised me. You could do it this way, you could do it in another way, you could do it separately, but the big question is discipline and whether you are disciplined enough not to touch the money. I find EPF or even CPF a very disciplined way where it's really money for my old age. Put it in, I can't touch it no matter what I want to do. And when I look at it now, it's like, well, thankfully I started early and put in a few extra dollars inside. So I would actually recommend, if it was my kid, to put, not all again, like I mentioned, but to put some aside extra, potentially even above what he's contributing.
Yeah, there's also a very good example which I posted on Twitter regarding voluntary contribution. Assuming that you contribute an additional 50 ringgit per month, then over the course of 30 years, your EPF retirement funds will actually increase by 10%, which is not a small sum lah, okay, considering that you retire by the hundreds of thousands. Okay. But we have a question from Lynette over here. If we contribute to EPF but end up settling overseas or migrating, can we withdraw the money later? Oh, this I think definitely can withdraw, right, Han? This one.
Not so straightforward answer. Honestly, it depends how old you are, obviously. So if you are 50, 55, then no issue lah, right? But you've got there's something called closing on return, closing on leaving the country, right? So if you have, there's two types lah. One, if you are a citizen, you must actually give up your citizenship.
Correct.
If you are just a resident, or rather if you're an expat sitting in Malaysia and you leave Malaysia, let's say you are a Singaporean, you leave Malaysia, go back to Singapore, yes, you can close the account, take out all your money. But if you're a Malaysian, you must renounce your citizenship as a requirement to withdraw all your EPF savings. So that's kind of it's a bit nuanced. It's not as simple as just settling overseas. What does that mean? Migrating. What does that mean? If it's you want to retain your citizenship, just migrate. No, you cannot. You cannot take out your EPF. But if you give up your citizenship, then yes.
All right. So it's not so straightforward lah. Okay. And like what we talked about just now, voluntary contribution, which Mr. Sani really supported. Here's the math lah. Okay. Assuming that you're a fresh grad, your salary is 2.4K per month. We do not include salary increments, bonuses, and inflation, right? After 30 years, you will have 459,000 ringgit. Okay. But if you voluntarily contribute 50 ringgit per month, which is a lot of money, within the same time frame, you have almost 500,000 ringgit, which is almost 10% higher than the original sum over here. Okay. But do note that by doing so, you will not withdraw your funds until you are 50. Because a lot of people tend to have this misunderstanding, right, Han? They think that, hey, at the age of 50, I still cannot withdraw from EPF yet. But you can actually withdraw from which account is it already? Is it account one or account two? Han, I may need your help on this one.
Account two, if you still have money in account two, you can take out account two, which is typically, if you haven't withdrawn anything, it's about 30% of, 30%.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're 50, you can withdraw 30% of your EPF funds. Then 55, you can either go for like a monthly repayment type of thing or withdraw it lump sum. Am I right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, and yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our session tonight. Hopefully, it has been beneficial to you guys. I myself, I learned tons of things also from these two speakers. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you to the speakers as well.